Welcome, everybody. My name is Adam Braun. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Climate Club, and I have the incredible honor today to welcome genuinely one of my favorite people in the sustainability space, the incredible Kati Kallins. With that said, usually in many cases, folks that are joining today have a little bit of context into an individual's background, but Kati, I'll allow you to maybe share a little bit about your background, some of your journey, and then we can dive into some of the questions. And again, leaving time for audience questions to be surfaced throughout that we will address towards the conclusion of today's webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adam, and the Climate Club team and everyone taking time out of their busy days to join us. And happy May, if you can believe it. As Adam mentioned, we have been working together the last year on Climate Club integration at Meta, which has been such a joy and a delight. I have been in this space for almost 13 years now, and I have learned more about product design and how to get employees excited about climate action in the last year than I have all before that. So I'm sure we'll jump into that. But just to get started, so my journey, I actually started as a bit of a policy wonk, working on water resource management with both nonprofits and in the government space. To me, the question of how do we equitably and sustainably really make sure that water is available for everyone was one of the first kind of tough problems around sustainability that really drew me in. And so I had the benefit of working with governments in Washington State and Australia, nonprofits across the West Coast, and then at the Environmental Protection Agency, thinking about like, how do we really think about this kind of mega problem and supporting everyone equitably. And after some work in both those spaces, what I was most excited to think about was what was that third piece of the economy that I actually wasn't tapping into. I'd gotten to do nonprofit and government work, but how did the private sector really play into this larger sphere of climate action? And so I found myself at Google helping to build their green building program for offices to really think about how, as they expanded as a company, that we could bring in healthy materials, make sure that the products that were coming into the space were healthy and supported, a good working environment, and also thinking about reduction in waste and water and energy for the office space. And I was just totally enamored by trying the idea of trying to build sustainability into a company. It was a very different audience and stakeholder base than I'd worked with before, but a lot of really great, smart people that I got to learn alongside. After some time at Google, I went to business school and got to learn a little bit more about what it was like to be a hardcore business person after being around so many tree huggers in the sustainability space. Did some sustainability consulting with BSR, corporate citizenship, and then ended up at Meta, where I got to build out their first sustainability council, really thinking about what is stakeholder engagement mean around sustainability. One thing I saw at Google and a lot of companies is, when this work starts, there's a couple of really, focused, passionate individuals and hopefully some leadership buy-in as well. But as the company grows and as the work matures, you need to create a bit more infrastructure for how this work can really be driven across all parts of the business. And so it was my joy to get to build a lot of that programming at Meta through many different cross-functional working groups. And then also think about, how do we communicate this work? How do we talk about climate and sustainability in a way that gets executives on board, employees to be part of the solution, and kind of everything in between? So that's a little bit about me.
Fantastic. As all of our participants have now heard, you've had this fantastic career spanning multiple large, complex organizations, really seeing the evolution of the space. I'd love to maybe kick things off with a little bit of perspective, if you can share that, and how you've seen the space of sustainability engagement in particular evolve over time, and some tangible areas of focus that in this work historically you've spent your time and really looked to target on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen huge growth and expansion, and I think the more that we get folks involved in this work, the more complex it gets. And that is a benefit and also can be a challenge as we get into things around like jargon and such. I think, one interesting space to think about is just even the terminology around climate, right? It used to be my first internship in college was with a company called Carbon Neutral, and we were working with organizations to, reduce their carbon footprint and become carbon neutral. We never hear really carbon neutral as a terminology very much anymore, and it's just, I think it shows that we've moved from this idea of less bad to more good. And it needs to be both, of course. But I think one of the things that I've really noticed at these different organizations is an understanding of what is our role in the climate crisis. How can we mitigate that? And then also, how can we use our unique superpowers as a company to do more good? So a lot of organizations will start with their operational footprint and thinking about where do we, have the most greenhouse gas emissions? Where are we using the most water and waste? And that's a really important starting point to understand, what is your footprint and how can you become more efficient and also reduce those emissions. And then I think going through that operational sustainability process, creating a materiality assessment, understanding and so what beyond the operational piece, like what is available to us and what are people looking to us for in terms of leadership. And at both Google and Meta, you have these really large platforms for search and social media. And so when we think about those companies, they don't actually have the biggest greenhouse gas footprints of every industry. And so while operational sustainability is important, moving beyond operations and thinking about, at Meta, for example, how could our family of apps, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, be utilized to support the climate crisis, partnering with organizations like the UN to create the Act Now bot, understanding, how do we support electrification by making that information more accessible to folks through the Climate Science Center. And then also, I think the piece around kind of internet companies and their potential is who is on your platform, who is on your product. And so working with climate creators, which is the next generation of users who are very passionate about climate action and actually have a voice that is really going to resonate with many of the customer base that, a corporate sustainability voice won't necessarily. So looking at, who are the key stakeholders and partners that drive the work of your business in the quote unquote non-sustainability context, and how can they be brought in to help really accelerate the work beyond operational sustainability as well.
I think that really actually nicely dovetails into my next question. You touched on some of the work that you have historically done, kind of building those bridges between the centralized sustainability team and some of those folks that might sit in the core business. What we've certainly seen at Climate Club is that the work of driving real action across the business is remarkably cross-functional. Would love for you to share any tips or best practices you've learned in leading these types of initiatives that require you to work with folks whose day jobs are not primarily focused on sustainability.
Yeah, definitely. So much of the amazing work that's happened at the range of organizations I've worked at would not be possible if it weren't for very passionate, smart people that found me somehow within the company. So I cannot ever understatement that. But I think really understanding, what is the potential of your employee base and partner teams to drive sustainability really comes back to understanding the culture of your organization. So I'll speak a bit about how it's worked at Meta, but I think it's really, something to modulate depending on the organization and something to keep in mind. But so Meta, for example, is a very bottoms up organization. There's a lot of individuals who are told you care about this topic, fine, figure out how to make it part of your job. We want you to still be driving the department goals and making sure that leadership is getting what they want. But if this is important to you, let's figure out how it can be part of your jobs. I know that's not how every organization is organized, but I do think that there's opportunity always in that space of kind of understanding what is the potential for flexibility and adaptability, especially if you're within an organization and you have a proven track record. So one of the key things when I came into Meta to build this kind of cross-functional infrastructure was to understand, okay, who's doing sustainability today? Who is, maybe seeing themselves as a sustainability advocate because they're, on the business travel team or the energy team or these different orgs. And maybe they don't have a capital S sustainability job, but they are, a key input in terms of the data that they're gathering, the work that they're driving to Meta's overall sustainability goals as a company. And so the public goals that Meta has is net zero 2030, water positive 2030. We also have a host of internal goals around responsible supply chain, data center construction design, and workplaces design. And so, as you can imagine, like as that portfolio of work gets bigger and bigger, the organizations and the individuals and teams that touch that work gets more and more diverse. And so understanding within the organization who is already contributing to that, and is that function working? Part of the reason I got brought in to start the Sustainability Council is that there was actually quite a few gaps where folks were kind of just running ahead with work that was very well intentioned, but it was actually kind of counterintuitive and like sometimes in opposition to the work of other teams. So there was big interest from leadership to say, how do we bring these people together for more regular communications and also have alignment around the framework of goals and objectives, so that if a sourcing manager on the Reality Labs team and a construction manager on the data center design team, they both understand that they're both dealing with materials, and it could actually be that their work is laddering up to a company hardware circularity goal. So starting to think about, how do we bring together disparate key stakeholders? And also, I think it can never be overstated the importance of listening. When I came into the role, I did a really big listening tour of just understanding what was working and what wasn't. And it was at a point of inflection for the team. There was reorgs that were happening. There was a lot of people who actually were not super happy. And so I think it's the listening and also not taking it personally if what has been happening before you joined wasn't working is another thing to keep in mind. And then I will just note by saying, that's kind of how I approached partnership and collaboration. So really understanding what people's goals are, where they were not having that reached, and how I could support. And then I think there's this other really key piece around employees. So there's partner teams and executives, and there's one, specific partnership approach there. But then there's all these employees that were sending me and my team's pings around like, how do we get involved? We care about sustainability. Can we join the sustainability team? Can we be on climate? And I love those people. And also our team is always like a dozen people or so. And so the question became like, how do we really educate and activate those employees so that they can be part of the solution, even if they don't have a capital S sustainability job? And one of the big things that I learned was that there were kind of some in-house ERG groups, Green At groups, as we called them. And they were doing a lot of organizing around events within the office and understanding from a facilities perspective what was happening. But then there was also a big group of folks who wanted to participate, but that wasn't of interest to them. And so by doing some more listening, doing a little bit more of the understand work, we learned that they actually had a bunch of technical skills they wanted to contribute to this work. And so we started to build out internal hackathons so that they could start to use their technical skills, put it towards our product. And then I think, the chapter 3 of that is the Climate Club work, where we were then able to say, those of you who want to be active parts of the climate work at Meta, and you are actually contributing to our emissions through coming into the office and eating food in the cafes, waste that's getting created into the office, would you like to be part of this pilot where we're actually trying to reduce our scope 3 emissions, specifically around employee action? And as I think we'll get into, there was a ton of interest, and we learned a ton about just folks who weren't actually being captured by this kind of Green At event-based, facilities-based group, and then also this more technical kind of hackathon group.
Yeah, I would love maybe for you to share a little bit on that front. You're actually the first person we've had on this Sustainability Leaders series who has worked directly with Climate Club. So would love for you to just touch a little bit about the challenges that you were seeking to solve in working with us, and how partnering with Climate Club enabled you to achieve those goals.
Definitely. Drawdown has a great saying, which is every job is a climate job. And ever since I heard that, I've been really trying to think about how do we do that internally at Meta. There is a internal communications platform that we have that reaches about 4,000 employees, but 4,000 in the face of 70 to 80,000, that there's a long tail of folks that were not being engaged. And I think anyone on the call who's familiar with engagement will know that we've also just had really unique challenges engaging individuals since the pandemic. just because of a host of factors that I won't go into that most of you know. And so this idea of, how do we continue to engage our employee base who we believe want to be part of the solution, and we've seen from kind of internal surveys want to be part of the solution, but they don't see themselves as maybe having time to participate in an event or a hackathon. And the other barrier, I think, unfortunately, to a lot of employees getting involved in this work is they think they need like a PhD in climate science. And I've been in this space for over a decade, and I am still always very intimidated by all of the science out there. So I get it. But what was really great about the Climate Club work that we got to do with your team was to understand, okay, we as a company had hit net zero for scope 1 and scope 2. The next kind of big behemoth that everyone is thinking about right now is scope 3. And we have a huge supplier engagement program, which is a big chunk of where Meta's scope 3 emissions are. But then there was this other piece of the pie that was employee-driven emissions. And we had started to do work to engage with really key partners through the infrastructure previously discussed, with facilities and business travel and these other groups. But at the end of the day, they only have so much power over the levers. For example, when we think about our cafes, the chefs, they can want to put in an entirely plant-based menu, right? It's going to reduce carbon. It's probably even a little bit cheaper. They can have these large culinary goals. But if employees are not excited about that food being in the cafe, if they get back a ton of feedback that that's not what they want, then that can backfire on them. And so there needs to be this signaling of not only kind of the systems and the opportunities to travel less for business, eat healthier in the offices, produce less weight, but also there needs to be a signal from the employee side as well. And so Climate Club created this really awesome opportunity for us to bring in 500 MetaMates to basically pilot what it looks like to provide that signal back to these teams that are pitching to their leadership orgs and pitching to their procurement teams about what they are hoping to create because of Meta's climate goals. But employees have been kind of this like amorphous group that we haven't been able to get consistent action from. And we also know that there's a huge education gap as well. So with the pilot that we started in January, we focused on food and waste in the offices. So it's kind of segmenting down to folks who are coming into that because of existing culinary and waste roadmaps that we had for the climate program, and really got employees to be noting, what they typically ate within the office, how they conducted waste in the office, and then tracking themselves every week to understand what their greenhouse gas emissions were based on the actions that they took. And to me, it was a really cool model because it was very clear and actionable, people going into the office, what are you eating? What are you throwing away? But then also there was this suite of playbooks that we were able to create with partners in the culinary and facilities org that actually had already created all of this great content about, why not choosing red meat is great for the planet and where our waste goes. And so they kind of had all this information because they're amazing and hardworking, but they were looking for a place to put it. And so it was a really great partnership to not only start to get that feedback loop from employees around action, but also give internal partners a really clear place to put work that they've already invested in and provide a lot of visibility and feedback for them. So that was the scope of the pilot. And I think one of the biggest learnings for me was how many employees who opted into the pilot had been thinking, which a lot of people do because of marketing, that the most important thing I can do in the office is recycle. But actually, as many of us know in the space, the food that you eat and specifically the amount of red meat that you eat is the biggest indicator of kind of your in-office footprint. And so to see folks who are already passionate about this, learning that in real time and adjusting their habits was really exciting.
So, in our work together, we identified these, several hundred individuals at Meta who raised a hand to participate in sustainability initiatives. In many cases, identifying opportunities for them to actually drive value to both sustainability and company-wide objectives in the business areas in which they sit. And while you referenced there's this large sustainability employee resource group, I think what we learned together was that there's a lot of people that want to take action that are often outside of that ERG. And so we'd love for you to share a little bit about the value that you derived from identifying those torchbearers when it comes to embedding sustainability, which we always hear is such a big goal for central sustainability leaders into the business function, and how helpful that is to you as a business, as a sustainability leader?
Definitely. I think one of the things that I come back to again and again is having advocates in different parts of the business is so valuable because they are seeing things that I will never get visibility to. Do not know about the next Instagram payment app. I do not know about the next, WhatsApp group. And these are all small parts of the business that when looked at with a sustainability and climate lens have huge opportunities for impact. And so I see them as kind of not only built-in advocates of the work that we're doing today when we think about carbon reductions, but also the work that can be done in the future because they can use their lens of expertise to really drive this work across the company. I can think of also, specific examples of when, the climate product team, for example, was working on trying to launch a new groups feature. And they were like, oh, we'd really love to find a software engineer in XYZ group. And they would do like a call to action in this channel. And, a couple people would raise their hands. And, that might seem like a small thing, but that can save like weeks and months of bureaucratic effort of trying to understand the process or the program or what's happening. Because while we are a tech company, that moves fast, it is also that there are many layers of this work that happens. And so if you can get someone at the right moment to provide you with the insight or the code or the understanding of the way the organization works or what is a priority for the leader, that can just really accelerate this work in a way that if you are just part of a core sustainability team that maybe is embedded within the company, but not with the level of expertise and our understanding of priorities, it is a challenge. The other thing kind of around like diversity of folks included is that really I think should be highlighted also is just the regionality differences. And I know we are not alone, Meta is not alone in this situation, have had a lot of highly engaged employees from the Europe region, from EMEA. That's also where we're seeing a lot of legislation right now around SEC disclosures and the like. And I think there's a really interesting push-pull function that can happen within global companies when you have individuals in region who get climate, who get sustainability, are asking a lot of questions around why not now? Why not this? Why not that? And it makes, we in California based company can think that we're very progressive, but actually I have many colleagues in London who would argue otherwise. And that forcing function is really helpful because it provides a broader global landscape of what's possible and what standards companies should be held to. And I think that global perspective just kind of pulls everyone along and also provides us with different insights into what's possible. Because as I mentioned before, getting renewable energy or water stewardship programs in different parts of the US is a very different conversation in Europe. And so by creating a global portfolio of this work with key stakeholders in region that are advocating and sharing that regional perspective, it just allows us to be a stronger program overall.
Got it. That is a fantastic answer. So a couple more questions from me, but I want to make sure we also have time for the audience. So we'll do lightning round.
Great. I'll answer very quickly.
Okay. So first one is just, you touched on one, but are there particular insights or opportunities that you identified through the work together between Meta and Climate Club that have been particularly valuable to you and your colleagues? And how do you think others can best glean similar actionable insights?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is important to keep in mind is organizations constantly grow and change. So tracking new leaders, tracking new company priorities, and if someone says no this month, next week it might be a not yet. So I think really keeping in mind that this is a fluid process and the socialization journey can take a long time depending on company leadership and where you are kind of directionally. And so really kind of keeping in your pocket who you want to be part of this work and continuing to come back to them with more data and more stories of success from other parts of the company will help build partnerships over time.
That's fantastic. So we often work with companies initially in a pilot phase where there's a clear population or area of the business that's targeted to demonstrate value, and then we scale together. Can you share the keys to designing an effective pilot program for scale?
Yeah, I find that really focusing the pilot is useful. I know when we discussed initially bringing in Climate Club, we'd been thinking about food waste and also maybe business travel and something else. And one of the great tools that I've learned from my folks on the friends on the product side is keep it simple, keep it focused, and then you'll be able to get back really tangible data to expand. So once we were thinking a little bit more about like what is manageable, we focused on US, we focused on folks in the office, we focused on partnering with a team that wasn't at the beginning of their journey. They were really far along in their carbon reduction journey. So they had the roadmaps, they had some of the tools and resources. So we could just, rather than coming to them and saying, hey, we have 10,000 things we'd like to put on your plate because you already have too much to do. We could approach them more as a partner and say, hey, you've already done this great work. We'd love to elevate it and get more visibility for it. And in the process, would you also like to be a key partner so that we can make sure that the feedback we're getting from this pilot based on the work that you've done helps build out your program long-term? And then the other thing too is that we set really clear engagement metrics and kind of, walked through with your team, which your team was great partners on this to understand like, okay, what's the threshold that we want for engagement? What's the threshold that we want for doing different playbooks, and really checking in on those, every couple of weeks to understand where we're tracking, where we could shift things to improve overall.
So I'll jump into some of the audience questions here as well. Balaji asked, what are the top 3 challenges that you faced when you first started in sustainability originally at Meta?
Yeah, I would say it's really hard to build cross-functional engagement when you are new. I think that, I always tell people when they start a company to just like use the I'm new, I don't know card as long as possible, because it buys you a lot of social capital. But it was hard to ramp up quickly on understanding the historical context of why certain people in this council maybe didn't like each other or didn't trust each other, and to just really segment that into saying, okay, this is how it was before I joined. This is now a different era, and work closely with your manager or other people on the team who have that historical context to understand how we can move around that, and also what's worked. So I think that's the other key piece is if you're coming into a sticky situation in terms of relationship management, get to know the stakeholder and what they like and dislike. This is kind of sounds silly maybe, and is maybe very meta specific, but we have micro kitchens at the office, and I learned what everyone's favorite snack was. So when I needed something, I would drop by their desk and maybe also have some goldfish. It can go a long way to just really remember individual details about people, because it shows that you care and you're listening, and also that you're interested in building a long-term relationship.
Yeah, I think that's really thoughtful, especially when thinking about those cross-functional working groups. So Jen asked a couple of great questions, but I'll touch on one, which is, what are common internal stakeholder objections to concrete action towards net zero? And how have you successfully overcome those objections?
Yeah, I think the big one, and I'm sure folks on the call will be familiar, is it costs too much. I think across the board, sustainability has gotten a bad rap for being the more expensive option, even when we can show through lots of data and studies that it's actually more efficient, it saves money over time. So I would say cost is definitely one. Also, the time piece, I think, is an interesting one. Sometimes with sustainability and climate objectives, it's on a longer time horizon. And if your company is really on like a quarter to quarter basis and looking at like really short-term budgets, that can also be a bit of a tension. So I think understanding where in the organization folks are more familiar with long-term planning, or where they find that more value, trying to link sustainability work with those other kind of long-range projects can be really helpful. The other objection that sometimes we get is, is there just going to be another round of regulations? How do we create more reactive versus proactive? And once again, I think that comes down to the team leadership and what folks are more comfortable with. I think people are pretty overwhelmed by all of like the regulations that are coming in, and, oh my gosh, are we going to have to shift? What do they want in the EU? What do they want here? What do they want everywhere? And so as much as you can kind of keep a grounded foundation in what is your North Star goals and how are you getting there, and continue to show that value through whatever, reporting, internal framework, scorecards are familiar for your team and your leadership, that will really show kind of sustained over time. And then the last thing that I'll note that is a challenge sometimes is being honest about things not working out. I think sometimes that, especially in like sustainability reports, companies just want to like shout from the rooftops all the things that worked out well. And actually, what I have seen overall is that that's usually not the path of every organization, and that you can gain so much legitimacy from key stakeholders by talking about what hasn't worked and how you're going to be working to improve and build on that, because that's just real life.
Fantastic. I think that's a phenomenal answer to that question. In particular, I know Deb had surfaced a similar question in advance in her work in sustainability engagement as well. So want to be sensitive to time. Kati, thank you so much for bestowing your wisdom to all of us that have had the good fortune to participate in today's webinar. Thank you once again for joining us, to both you and all others that have been able to participate today. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you so much.